Next, from the governor's mansion in Springfield, Congressman Aaron Schock talks about the federal debt and the likelihood of another confrontation over the need to raise the federal debt ceiling. We'll also hear his thoughts on the need to avoid massive cuts in defense spending and Medicare, cuts that are currently in the works. This runs about 10 minutes.
They didn't come to an agreement on the debt ceiling last year, which is going to trigger the massive cuts in both the Medicare and the defense spending. So you have $500 billion over the next 10 years. Defense Secretary Panetta's warned about how that would decimate our defense posture. What, if anything, can be done vis-a-vis those two programs?
Well, we can offer alternatives. We can offer a different path, and the House of Representatives has done that with our alternative to the sequestration. We had a series of hearings in the spring, and last month passed an alternative to the sequestration through the House of Representatives, got Republican and Democrat support, and it basically says here is our specific cuts to discretionary spending and to defense instead of just the across-the-board, some would say hatchet job that the sequestration would require if nothing alternatively is done. So it's obviously the House has taken action. We're waiting for the Senate to offer some alternative. But I think the fact that Leon Panetta, the Secretary of Defense, has said that if the cuts are allowed to go into effect, it will decimate the Department of Defense, that's pretty serious language coming from the Secretary of Defense. So I think we want to make sure that the Department of Defense is not a sacred cow. I do not advocate for somehow making them hold harmless or not subject to cuts, but I think we've got to make sure that while we still have troops in Afghanistan, while we still have people around the world that may be attempting to upset things, whether it be having to react to things in Egypt or Syria or Israel or Iran, we got to be prepared to be able to defend ourselves and our allies.
And I'm not quite sure where we stand on the debt ceiling, if we're going to have another trigger or hit the debt ceiling prior to January. If so, do you anticipate another major fight over approval of the debt ceiling?
I do. I actually think this will be more difficult than the last one because, we have now gone from roughly $14 trillion in debt to it will be $16 trillion when this $2 trillion extension is hit. It's estimated right now, Treasury's saying roughly November, December. Again, that's based on employment figures, revenue to the government and all that. But roughly, post-election was what was important to the president. You'll remember when we negotiated this, it was not going to come up before the election. So sometime post-election, probably before the end of the year. The real problem will be, as we just got done talking about the sequestration, there isn't enough money left within discretionary and defense to do another significant extension of the debt limit. So if you do another $1 trillion extension, another $2 trillion extension, and you have offsetting cuts, we're talking about 30% of the budget, 15% defense, 15% discretionary. The other 65 cents, the other 65% is Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and interest on the debt. And so the only way you deal with that part, the only way you make cuts there is if you do entitlement reform. And that's something where the president's been unwilling to have that conversation with us or to lay out specifics on what he would do with Medicare and Social Security. Obviously, we have laid out our proposals, been rather criticized for them, but we've laid them out there nonetheless. There's been some progress made on Medicare with Ron Wyden, the senator from Oregon, working with Paul Ryan to modify the Ryan proposal within our budget. So maybe there is some potential for entitlement reform come post-election, but that's what's going to have to be necessary.
I was going to say entitlement reform would take many months, I would imagine. So what happens when we hit this debt ceiling? As you just laid out, you're not going to have the financial wiggle room. Let's lay out for the viewers. What happens when we hit that? Is it akin to hitting your credit card limit and the credit card company doesn't extend your credit anymore?
Yeah, well, that was what the problem was 2 years ago, obviously. Or a year ago now. The question is, do we continue to raise the debt limit, continue to borrow money that we don't have, without a clear path in sight of how the escalated borrowing is reduced and eventually stopped? And I think the public is going to be very concerned if the Congress just just matter-of-factly extends the debt limit without making any serious changes to how we're accumulating debt. In other words,
But if we have the fight again, I mean, the last time the argument was made, well, this is almost causing our government to default, and that's even worse economically long run because of, both sides are accusing the others of intransigence. They want to pass it. You want to hold it up until cuts are made. So is it right to have that fight again and play out just like it did the last time?
I'm not sure that continuing to borrow money we don't have and going further and further in debt is really better for us in the long term. I'm aware of the debate that the last showdown caused great concern, but people should be concerned about our financial health. I mean, what's happening in Europe and Greece and their inability to deal with their debt and their unfunded liabilities is likewise a concern for most people in this country. When you go from 10 trillion now to 16 trillion in 4 years, that's an unsustainable debt accumulation rate. So, I mean, the fact of the matter is that the joke's out. The facts speak for themselves, and I think after the election, if not then, when is our federal government going to deal with this?
So you're saying it's worth the fight to try to hold it up?
I just think it's all going to be, you're going to have tax policy that's going to have to be resolved because all the tax rates expire at the end of the year. You're going to have the debt limit. You're going to have SGR, which is the doc fix, potential 30% cut to all Medicare recipients, which nobody thinks is going to happen, but it costs a lot of money to extend it. So you got all this stuff that needs to happen at the end of the year, and I think there may be some short-term thing done, maybe a 6-month deal, but then eventually, 2013 is when it's got to happen, I think.
Okay. By the way, on that sequestration thing, you said the House passed a plan.
Yeah.
Is there a review or some sheet that explains that plan somewhere? Or do you have some basics of what that is, or is that on your website or anything? Or?
I can make sure that you have it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I can
just
get
so we know what it is.
Mark to get it to you. Absolutely.
I have to ask about Morning Joe this week. You said that the House had passed the 5-year transportation plan. I know there's been some press about it on the internet. You messed up by saying...
Well, I misspoke. We passed a short-term extension. The point was that the governor was trying to make the statement that Republicans have been obstructionists on infrastructure, and my point was that's not true. The Republicans in the House proposed a 5-year bill, something that the Democrats, when they controlled the House, never did. In 2 years that I served in the House, we never had
a 90-day?
We passed a 90-day extension. The Senate passed a 2-year bill with the support of Republicans. Democrats in the U.S. Senate, as they rightfully point out, cannot do anything without Republican support. So the fact that the Senate passed a 2-year bill defies the statement that Republicans have been obstructionists, because obviously they worked with Democrats to pass a 2-year bill.
Except it hasn't passed the House yet, so he might have been talking about House Republicans.
Well, no, wait a minute. Just because the House and the Senate don't agree doesn't mean that it's partisan. The House and the Senate have historically been at odds for 200 years of our country's history. The point is that we're at this juncture because of leadership among the Republicans. It was the 5-year bill that the House proposed that caused the Senate to act. They so hated the 5-year bill that the House proposed, they said, well, we're going to come up with something better, and they came up with their 2-year bill. If this were Democrats wanting infrastructure and Republicans not, why have a highway bill for the first 2 years when they controlled the entire process? That was my point. And so, anyways.
Everybody's looking at you and the governor sitting together as like a matchup in a couple years for governor. Is that where are you on what you're running for? Senate, governor, House again for more leadership positions?
Nothing's new. I'm running for Congress, and all the other conjecture and static is what it is.
And I wanted to follow up on the national debate on the leaks, the security leaks.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? And if you wanted to say whether or not you think the Attorney General Holder should stay or go?
Well, two separate issues. One, on the security leaks, I think the president needs to launch an investigation, an independent investigation into who is causing the leaks. Obviously, based on the Defense Department's own statements, they are undermining national security. That's a serious threat. I don't care who's doing it. It needs to stop, and whoever's doing it needs to be held accountable. And it's only the president, the chief executive, that can establish a special investigation. He needs to do that. Obviously, Darrell Issa, who runs the Investigatory Committee of Congress, which is the Government Oversight Committee, is going to attempt to do his own. But I think the president, this is an opportunity for him to exercise leadership, to say, look, this is my White House, it's my administration, and I'm going to get to the bottom of it. As far as Mr. Holder, I'm not going to call on him to do anything. He works for the President of the United States. It's up to the President to decide whether he's a quality employee or not. It's up to the President to decide when to hire and fire him. I will tell you, if I were the President, Eric Holder would not work for me any longer. The fact that the gun running incident occurred, the fact that Eric Holder claims under oath that he knew nothing about it, the fact that Eric Holder under oath states that he doesn't know within his administration who authorized it, is to me a glaring lapse of leadership, judgment, and organization within the Department of Justice, and he either needs to find out and get to the bottom of it, or he's complicit in the cover-up.
If you were advising Mitt Romney, who you say he should pick for vice president?
Somebody who can serve as president if something happens to him, and somebody that he trusts, you know, I think those would be my qualifications.
Candidates?
You're watching the Illinois Channel.